up yonder, I'll be there. Oh, it's ready. Like that? Okay. Just whisper it. I'll remember it. Oh, here. Nope, these are old. Good morning. Whether you are participating online or here in person, we say welcome home to Live Oak Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Alyssa Goss, and I am so glad you're here. For our guests, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the Live Oak Weekly newsletter. It's the go-to place to know everything that's happening here. There is a link on our homepage. We also have Facebook groups, which is actually the go-to place, FYI. Our minister, Reverend Joanna, is on sabbatical through August. We are very pleased to welcome C.T. Goss to our pulpit. If you do not know who C.T. Goss is, we want to welcome you to Live Oak. We are happy all of the visitors could join us today. C.T. has been attending Live Oak for 17 years since being married in the church and has served in various capacities in the church, ranging from building maintenance, an RE teacher, and even board president. Some days it seems like he's actually married to the church. Outside of church, he has held leadership positions in several software companies. He once was an HOA president. He enjoys Home Depot, live music, and spending times outdoors. He's also quite a looker. And now, here and at home, let us light our chalices. Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in every life. Our opening hymn today is number 1039, Be Thou With Us. Please rise either in body or in spirit and join us in singing.
Be Thou with us now and always, now
Glad I was here for that rehearsal. Every week when we gather, we share pieces of our lives with each other. We share our sorrows so that we may offer comfort to one another, and we share our joys so that we may celebrate together. Oh my goodness. After weeks of nothing, okay. Henley Goss says her joy is that we have so many children here, the most since COVID. She also adds cough, cough, which is really inappropriate, Henley. Nancy She says, my son-in-law got great news about his colon cancer. She is grateful. Rachel says that she has a joy that she was awarded a small grant to partner with community members to improve equity and access to kidney transplantation. That's really cool. Julia says, I'm happy to be visiting from First Church in Austin to see some of my U Bar U campers. That's cool. We'll take that. Apollo is handling the loss of their Mimi better, but school's about to start and they're worried. And finally, Michael and Harmony have a concerned joy. Harmony's father is recovering from back surgery. The recovery has caused a scary flare-up from his Parkinson's symptoms, but he appears to be improving today, so that's great. Mixed bag. Hold on one second. First time. For those of you watching online, I should have said this to begin with, share in the chat box any joys or sorrows that you are carrying today. In this religious community, we hold with reverence the knowledge that each week a multitude of different emotions and experiences are brought together into this space. One of us may be celebrating, one weeping, one filled with determination, one with despair. This mosaic of experiences is holy, and we honor all with our witness. All right. You're up.
So big idea, my request of my youngest daughter. We're going to bring back an old tradition at Live Oak and have the kids come forward if you're comfortable. Sit around. So today's story is Sophia Valdez, Future Perez, written by Andrea Beatty and illustrated by David Roberts. Sophia was a baby who got things done, helping her family before she turned 1. She and Abuelo went out every week to help elderly friends around Blue River Creek who couldn't get out and about on their own and with no place to gather were stuck home alone. Raking the leaves, taking pets for a walk, or just dropping by for a treat and a talk, Sophia Valdez did as much as she could for her family and friends and her whole neighborhood. A dreamer, a doer, a real-life go-getter. Most people like good, but Sophia liked better. Each morning, Abuelo walked Sophia to class. They walked home again along Blue River Pass, making plans, munching cookies, Abuelo and girl, except for that Tuesday when Pup saw the squirrel. With a howl, Pup took off racing all through the town. Over, under, beneath, and around, Sophia scrambled to try to keep up with the hollering man and the bellowing pup. Up the squirrel ran to the top of a hill made of leftover junk from the local landfill. They reached the tip top of that mountain of trash, which jiggled and broke with an ear-splitting crash. Down they all tumbled and hit with a thud on a moldy old pumpkin surrounded by mud. Ouch, cried Abuelo. He struggled to stand. A dangerous mess, he said, grasping her hand. The next day, Sophia walked to school solo, but it wasn't the same without her Abuelo. This is not right, declared young Sophia. who glared at Mount Trashmore and got an idea. The very next morning at dawn, she planted a sign at the front of the lawn. She stood back and smiled, and Pup gave a bark. Get rid of Mount Trashmore. Let's build a new park. Each of her neighbors had something to say about benches and fountains and places to play, meeting spots, gardens, a basket for bees, a rubber duck pond, and a kiosk for cheese. She drew every thought on her map of the park, which was perfectly perfect by 1:15 She drifted to sleep in her soft, cozy bed. Then, bam, she woke up when a thought smacked her head. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized each one of her neighbors had said, "Let me know when it's done." They all thought Sophia could build it alone, but how could one girl do so much on her own? The weight of that thought made her tender heart ache as night thunder growled and she lay wide awake. The dawn brought the storm and the gloomy sky wept. At the heartsick Sophia finally slept. Abuelo baked cookies when Sophie got up. He gave her a bagful and sneaked one to Pup. He blinked back a tear as he hugged his Sophia. For courage, he whispered, "Te amo, mi vida." Sophia's knees wobbled. She felt weak inside. She looked at his ankle and quite nearly cried. Though she didn't feel brave or courageous at all, Sophia Valdez went to face City Hall. She was down here. The mayor's office sent her to room 401, the Blue River Creek Department of Fun, which sent her downstairs to room 302, the office of duck ponds and cool things to do, to the office of monkeys, the Department of Cheese, the division of fountains and meetings and bees, then down to the basement, so musty and cramped, where all the town's papers were sorted and stamped. And that's where the clerk said what no one else did. "You can't build a new park. You're only a kid." The words smacked Sophia deep down in her heart. Her plan was kibosh before it could start. "I think," said Sophia, that law is wrong." But her second grade voice didn't sound very strong. The clerk said, "Clearly it cannot be done. Do you have any questions?" Sophia said, "One. If you were me, and if I was you, and he was your grandpa, what would you do?" Well," said the clerk. Then she said nothing at all. She thought and she thought, then she sent out a call to every employee throughout City Hall. The entire government of Blue River Creek crammed in the office to hear Sophie speak, but her words jumbled up and her cheeks turned bright red as a dozen emotions rushed into her head. Her heart beat so loudly she thought it would crack. The crowd leaned in closer. Sophia leaned back. Then her arm brushed the leg of the old cookie sack. And that was the moment when Sophia first knew being brave means doing the thing you must do, though your heart cracks with fear, though you're just in grade 2. She took a deep breath, looked the mayor in the eye, and though her knees wobbled, she held her head high. Sophia started talking. She spelled out her plan and why it all mattered and how it began. And once she got rolling, she had lots to say about meeting spots, monkeys, and places to play, and other ideas for things they could do to help the town elders and other folks too. She had thoughts on the library, thoughts on the zoo, and perhaps a way to combine the two, and... "All right," cried the mayor, "go start a petition. If the town wants a new park, we'll form a commission." And so Sophia got right to work, with some help from her family and Pup and the clerk. Then others joined in, not all, but a few, like Miss Leela Greer and the kids in grade 2. There were hearings and surveys and taxes to figure, then bulldozers, cranes, and a blue bigger digger. They all built that park. That's how it got done, with the hard work of, by, and for everyone. But it began with the dream of one person, just one, who laced up her shoes and then led the way to help Blue River Creek get a new place to play. Now every evening till long after dark, the town comes together at Citizens Park. They all hold this truth to be self-evident, that Sophia Valdez could grow up to be president. Until then, Sophia, that real-life go-getter, helps Blue River Creek get better and better.
Every week, we engage in the spiritual practice of generosity, combining our resources to support the ministries of this church. Our mission is to embrace joy, enrich connections, encourage growth, and empower dreams. But we can't do any of that unless we are taking care of the buildings and grounds of this church. So in that spirit, the Share the Plate recipient for this 5th Sunday in July is Live Oak's House and Grounds budget. Unexpected expenses, including a gas leak, have created a deficit of almost $4,000 in the budget categories for repairs and maintenance of our building and property. We can help defray that with Share the Plate donations this week. We now invite you to go to liveoakuu.org and click on donate, or we'll let the branches fall on your car.
Today's reading is Marginal Wisdom by Leslie Takahashi. They teach us to read in black and white. Truth is, the rest is false. You are whole or broken. You love who you love is acceptable or not. Life tells its truth in many hues. We're taught to think in either or, to believe the teaching of Jesus or Buddha, to believe in human potential or a power beyond a single will. I am broken or I am powerful. Life embraces multiple truths, speaks of both and of and. We are taught to see in absolutes, good versus evil, male versus female, old versus young, gay versus straight. Let us see the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. Let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture our many identities. The day is coming when all will know that the rainbow world is more gorgeous than monochrome, that a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, stubborn rocks in its course, that the margins hold the center. So today what I want to talk about is consensus, moderation, and compromise. We'll explore the history, when it is or is not appropriate, and question if we've evolved away from compromise as a society. So in the past, we've relied on moderates to negotiate change. I don't mean totally neutral arbitrators here, lawyers and that type, but the more opinionated moderates. They are methodical progress creators. They're the people who do the boring, thankless work of hashing out the details that make the big ideas work. These are the representatives in our government who don't have the Twitter following or whatever the social media, the QAnon is on these days, that big name purists have. They're the forgettable and aren't especially engaging, but they get stuff done. Someone you don't hear quotes from very often here in this church is Barry Goldwater, a Republican senator, who is credited with evolving the Republican Party from an elitist group to a more populist, Reagan-friendly mindset. And he said this about compromise. Mark my word, if and when these preachers get control of the Republican Party, and they're sure trying to do so, it's going to be a terrible damn problem. Frankly, these people frighten me. Politics and governing demand compromise. But these Christians believe they're acting in the name of God, so they can't and won't compromise. I know, I've tried to deal with them. So he didn't mention the Supreme Court there, but it sure seems that even Mr. Goldwater was right in worrying about fundamentalists playing a larger role in our democracy. Moderates play a critical role of finding the next right step towards justice in support of progress. Impassioned liberals and entrenched conservatives alike are annoyed by their slow progress or maybe frustrated by their proposed changes, but to me that's a good indication that a fair compromise is on the table. Often when a group can't decide between two choices, a third option is needed. Moderates a lot of times provide this third choice. This played out this week between Joe Manchin, a conservative Democratic senator from West Virginia. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's been in the news a lot these days. And Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader. After years of inaction on climate change, it's looking like we might have a decent next right step bill pretty soon. While things were added to this bill to please less progressive folks like more oil and gas leases, overall, it's progress toward our climate goals. This wouldn't have been possible without compromise, and at least it's something. We're moving forward. Buddhists talk about finding a middle way that's a balance between the extremes of self-denial and indulgence. In modern language, we might say all things in moderation. The Buddhist language is a bit more pessimistic way of saying it to me. The middle way being a path to the cessation of suffering. This doesn't sound all that comfortable, but if we could find a balance between suffering and self-indulgence that's sustainable, we could probably solve a lot of the world's problems. You know, things like hunger, energy, poverty, housing, all take moderation and compromise. I personally admire this pursuit of the middle way and identify with the moderate stance, probably due to the people and circumstances I've been surrounded with in my life. I grew up in the Dallas suburbs, and I was surrounded by conservative values, and some of my best friends are pretty far right, and sort of are today. I was definitely influenced by that immersion, and have had to do a lot of relearning or unlearning about the actual facts of topics ranging from things like healthy relationships, AIDS, and even basic human reproduction, to American and Texas history and the injustice Native people and people of color have endured. When I eventually learned that I was pretty much lied to for many of my formative years by educators who, you know, to their credit, it was legally mandated lies from the Texas School Board and state leaders, I felt angry that so many resources were wasted on those lies and wondered how many of my peers would never know the truth. And so that's kind of made me a lot more understanding of where people are coming from in their perspectives. With more exposure to diverse perspectives, experiences, and ideas, I've shed many of those unexamined assumptions I held as a young person. I try not to take anything a historian, educator, media personality, or politician says at face value without thinking about their possible ulterior motives for making the statement or taking that stance. I definitely have a skeptical first reaction to a lot of news and a lot of statements made by people. Today I surround myself with pretty far left liberal people in my life. Usually in political discussions we can agree on principles, but sometimes we disagree on implementation details and time frame. We try not to have anything be too taboo for discussion in our house, so we often drift into territory that many families would want to avoid to preserve pleasant conversation. And I want my kids to be able to see both sides of an issue, so we often try to present the other side's perspective too, which often really frustrates people in the house. I try to make it clear, I don't necessarily believe what these people are saying, but here's why they feel that way, and here's, where they're coming from. It's a lot more fun to just revel in righteous indignation than to try to understand why someone might feel differently than you do. But I feel like it's important to examine and defend your views to a wide range of people. So with this background, sometimes I feel like I don't fit in fully in any group. I'm definitely more liberal than the conservatives, but my practicality tests the patience of the liberals. There aren't really bumper stickers that speak to the nuance of a considered moderate opinion. During the Black Lives Matter protests, for instance, instead of defund the police, I thought a more careful way of saying that would be something to the effect of divert 40 or 50% of our resources from policing to mental health care, family services, and at-risk youth programs. But, that wouldn't fit on a bumper sticker or protest sign. I get that punchy slogans are needed to be provocative, motivate people to action, and start conversations. But they also result in the opposition having juicy sound bites and statements taken out of context to further entrench people who may have been receptive to a more gentler approach. Practical, achievable solutions can be frustrating to people pushing for change. I try to focus on the next right move rather than the biggest move. I was taught that change was slow and steady, and that compromise was necessary for progress. In our big idea, Sophia never encountered a commercial developer intent on building yet another self-storage facility. She didn't have to deal with public-private partnerships that are required today in major fundraising efforts. She just had to find a design compromise that met everyone's needs and desires to give a rousing speech at City Hall. While this is an inspiring story to tell our kids, I wonder if we're setting them up for disappointment later in life when they have to deal with people working against their interests who seemingly can't be reasoned with using science and facts. We'd probably have to rewrite the book in a 10-part series with Sophia seeing the fruits of her labor sometime around her high school graduation. That being said, it's probably more important to inspire the next generation to action rather than assume defeat. I'll keep reading the book as is. So we've touched on compromise and moderation historically, and in my experience. But recently, with the increasing polarization, normalization of previously radical views, refusal to accept facts, and inability of our government to check and or balance itself, I've been wondering if there's a role for moderate views and strategy going forward. Is the classic moderate approach of compromise and negotiation obsolete and hurting progress instead of facilitating it? Something we've been working on together at Live Oak has been anti-racism work. In Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, he makes the case that there's no room for moderation in anti-racism work. The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it's anti-racist. One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between safe space of not racist. Racist or anti-racist, that's it. You know, that's kind of a tough spot for a moderate to accept. But this challenged my previously held beliefs on compromise as it relates to racial equity and restorative justice. We're prompted to evaluate whether a given program or policy is racist or anti-racist on a binary basis, not a spectrum. So what's a moderate to do? You gotta choose a side. Like, you gotta pick the side of ethics. An ethical person can't support racist policy, so we must work toward restorative justice, which requires supporting anti-racist policies and initiatives. We can't compromise our way into a post-racist society. We have to choose the path of restorative justice or continue to languish in the status quo. So what about another situation where a middle way isn't really possible? The Russian invasion of Ukraine, where normally the US and other world leaders would tiptoe around and denounce the violence without provoking Putin and the nuclear power that he represents. But this action was so heinous and the reasoning so absurd that a swift and forceful set of sanctions were put in place around the world. It also seems to be galvanizing nations in Eastern Europe to join NATO who famously previously had remained neutral. Sweden and Finland have requested to join NATO, and even Switzerland has participated in EU sanctions against Russia. So, what do we think of when we think of neutrality? Switzerland, even they're choosing sides in certain situations. In situations like this, there's no room for neutrality. You either stand against the aggressors or you support them with inaction and acceptance as approval. So, we've established that there are some issues where moderation isn't ethical. What about a favorite UU governance model from a few years ago, consensus? According to the UUA's overview on consensus decision-making, consensus is not the same thing as unanimity. It is not that all participants must agree to the proposal, rather they must agree not to stand in the way of the proposal. Consensus is reached when no participants hold strong concerns that are based in the group's stated purpose or values. So if you need help kind of parsing that apart, which I did when I first read that, this always kind of struck me as splitting hairs and confusing. So on a given proposal, you can either agree and support it, disagree, but not enough to stand in the way, or number 3, disagree enough to block it. So there's sort of a few different choices you have. But I kind of think that asks a lot of people to do enough introspection to the reasons and degree of disagreement to decide if they disagree enough or for the right reasons to have a proposal pass or not. So what if 1 or 2 people in the group are entrenched in opinion and hold up progress? In my experience, difficult decisions are avoided and progress is blocked. The status quo is the default and people fighting for change are frustrated and leave the group. Clark Kerr, University of California president, who was ousted by Reagan for allowing protests on campus, by the way, said, "The status quo is the only solution that cannot be vetoed. So the status quo is the default. If you don't push for change, you're stuck with what you got." The UUA, by the way, has since moved away from recommending this governance model, as has this church. I just finished serving as president of the Board of Trustees at Live Oak. I viewed this role as one that had an obligation to present forward-looking opportunities for the board to enact and inspire change, but at the same time, prepare and present these potentially controversial topics without letting personal bias tint how I was presenting it or how the prepared materials. I voted my conscience, of course, but tried to let the discussion proceed organically, even when it was meandering away from where I thought it would go or where I'd personally want it to go. I think that's a sign of a healthy decision-making body, one that has vibrant discussion, but ultimately is decisive and enacts change. So we're moving forward, but we're not necessarily, but we're incorporating everyone's opinions along the way. So maybe that's the sweet spot for compromise and moderation, arcing toward justice, but taking as many people along with you as possible. Not in every situation, as we've discussed, but situations dealing with differing opinions on less clear-cut issues require compromise and steady progress. Before digging your heels in as an automatic reaction to disagreement, take a minute and think about how being a more empathetic and understanding on the other person's views might be helpful. Maybe you could build on common ground you both agree on. So to everyone here, I challenge you to use the next right thing strategy to enact change when it seems insurmountable. Incremental improvement is still improvement, and together we can bend the long arc of the moral universe toward justice one step at a time. Thank you. So as we enter a time of meditation, I invite you to remove any distractions from your lap, center yourself, and I'll read for you first, "There is Room for You Here" by Mary Edis. If God is your strength and companion, and prayer the means of centering your thoughts, there is room for you here. If the teachings of the Buddha give you clarity and calm in the midst of human striving, there is room for you here. If Gaia's seasonal rhythms lead you best through the myriad steps of life's great dance, there is room for you here. If the still mysterious capacity and power of the mind stirs your imagination and quickens your pulse, there is room for you here. Rest now beside that spring, wherever it is for you, and let your attention go to the small places inside or out in the great wide world, places or people in need of healing, or for which your heart is filled with thanksgiving. And in that spirit, let us be silent together for a time. And now, please rise and body your spirit for our closing hymn, number 288, All Are Architects.
All are architects of fate, working in his walls of time, some with massive deeds and great, some
There's no formal faith development class today. Join us for coffee and conversation in the fellowship hall. We extinguish this flame, but we recommit anew to carrying into our week the flame of justice and love. May we share with others the courage and strength and wisdom we find here.